Well, here's the other question, okay? You have in two of the three sports we cover football, baseball, basketball, and this especially applies to basketball. I mean, a lot of the fun of the tournament, I mean, sure, everybody loves to see, at least the TV people for certain, and those who like to see the blue blood standing at the end to battle it out because it makes a better product, which I'm not arguing with that. But what makes the NCAA tournament in basketball so much fun is those 4-13 games. It's the 15 out of the America East or somewhere that occasionally knocks off a Syracuse or someone like that. You lose so much if you just make this. Let's say we're going to go to a 64 team tournament again, and it's just the teams that are in those four alleged 16 team conferences. What do you do with the NCAA basketball tournament then? I mean, is there some kind of a happy medium here where the other side just goes, hey, we know we're lost. We know we need to tap into some of this revenue. Let's come together in the postseason and we'll bring our teams and you bring your teams and we'll try to pretend things are as they once were for the sake of this one event. I'm really curious to see how this works to lesser extent in baseball, because I think a lot of times the big dogs, the LSUs, the Vanderbilts, those are the teams that are standing at the end in baseball. And basketball, you may be left with Butler and Duke at the end. I mean, this can go a lot of ways, as we've seen, or VCU in the Final Four, any number of teams that you could pick there. To me, the big question of the what happens next is what happens with the NCAA basketball tournament as we know it now.
Yeah, it'll be different. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it because again, and we know too in basketball, just like in the other sports, but in basketball there is a reliance too, just on the sort of advanced stuff. I mean, we've seen Ken Palm and that kind of stuff just kind of be something that's become like such a regularly used situation, like system to be able to place these teams and to figure all this stuff out to compile a tournament each and every year. And okay, again, if Texas and Oklahoma are added to the mix and the SEC all of a sudden they're to 16 teams, and like you said, let's say the other conferences go to 16 as well. It's just, I mean, when you look at the numbers, those are probably going to stand out over some of the other, smaller, mid-major, low-major conferences you're comparing to, and you're going to maybe have the tendency to take those teams and add them to the mix versus the others. And that's another thing I worry about. We talk about increased conference games, right? The SEC, like, I think we've seen conferences already move to it. Like, what is it, the Big Ten, and some of the others have already moved to increased number of conference games during the regular season in basketball. Well, I think the more you move towards bigger conferences, again, you're going to move towards more conference games. And I think that's where, okay, you have to remove games non-conference wise, and you start to lessen the amount of games that you play against mid-major schools, which, by the way, need those games revenue-wise in a lot of cases. But those games start to go away. And where do they get that from? Are they just going to play each other? They're not going to get the same type of impact from a revenue standpoint. They're not going to get the same type of exposure. Take, for example, pick a mid-major team. It doesn't even matter. And all of a sudden, if they're playing Alabama on an ESPN, 2 game or something versus going out and playing a team from, again, just random pick here, Big Sky or somewhere, completely different scenario. If you have to replace those kind of games, it's just, I think that's another thing you have to, that's a ripple effect. And it doesn't matter. I know if you're looking at it for the SEC, you have to do what's best for the SEC, but at the same sense, again, you're taking games away that, like I said, I understand it from the SEC standpoint. Probably taking some of those games away is a good thing, but I also worry that, for those mid-major schools and stuff that rely on these, which is the same in football, right? Like it's you play these bye games and you get your money and you go home. But that's significant. Even if you lose 65-0, there's a lot of significance that goes along with that because revenue is important, especially given what happened last year. There are some schools that need that more than ever now. But if you start to move away from it, I don't know where those games come from, and I don't know where, maybe that revenue is made up from. So.
Well, the other part of the scheduling question is this. Let's just do this hypothetically speaking. Let's say that you've got a 16-team SEC that goes into effect, just for the sake of argument. It was going to go into effect this season. Okay. So now you've got Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC. For basketball, I presume one of two things, maybe. You would either, and I don't think the first one is the way it would go for, money reasons, but then it gets hard, okay? Because every team, you've got 15 potential opponents. Do you stop and just say, well, we play everybody in the league once, and if Kentucky is playing Tennessee and Lexington one year, then Kentucky will play Tennessee and Knoxville the next year. Do you do that and just stop at a 15 game schedule, or do you say, all right, we're going to use these pods as people have speculated? So let's say you're Alabama, and the pods go as someone has proposed, where you've got Auburn, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt in the league. If you're Alabama, do you play home and home with the other three teams in your pod and then play everybody else once? So that makes an 18-game schedule, what I think is what we've got now. How do you go with that scheduling aspect? We'll get to baseball in a minute, but basketball, I wonder how they would do that.
Yeah, I do too, because like you said, there are different ways you could do it, but I just don't. I still think that ultimately, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think the end goal is you want to add more conference games. Like I think that is. I just feel like that's going to be the direction we head in. And like you said, maybe you could set it up to where it's like, all right, you play everybody once because you do have, enough teams now to where it's like, all right, well, 15 or whatever it is, and maybe you add some more somewhere else in there, but you don't have to change it maybe all that much. And I want to say this, like, I don't see a scenario where all of a sudden you're just going to say, well, you've only, you wind up playing 5 non-conference games in basketball or something. I think you're going to have still a pretty good chunk of games. And I was just sort of mentioning that a minute ago as sort of the doomsday scenario situation where it's like, if you keep adding and adding and adding, eventually, again, that just, I think, lowers the amount of possibilities for the mid-major, low-major schools to play those kind of games. But I do think that you're still going to have those non-conference games. I mean, it's because in basketball too, we know like it's different because you're playing more games. You're playing 35 or whatever it is. And so you're still going to have those games, but I think it's just at a certain point, what is that cutoff line when it comes to conference games? Because you do have so many more opportunities available. And also too, we have to think of it. It's like, well, if I'm sitting back from an ESPN standpoint and I'm the SEC network, well, I want content. Like I want live content. Like that's what people pay for. And so I want more games. I want more opportunities to have an SEC basketball game in prime time. So give me more games on the schedule between SEC teams so I can do that. And so I think that's another sort of business aspect that's going to come along with it. And as we know, sometimes, I mean, the SEC is going to do their thing, but a lot of stuff depends on TV too. And because there's a lot of money invested in this deal, with the SEC network and all this other stuff. So there are decisions made that have to go along with that. And so I don't know. I think that there's just going to be a lot of things they've got to figure out. But as we said, if they've been doing this since February, then they probably already started to figure out some of those things.